Well, it's good to be back. I was out of town last week, so I hated missing, and then Steve was sick. So he was scheduled to teach and got a hold of me on Wednesday and said, I cannot do it. And so fortunately, on the BetterMan site, they have all the previous times that we've done it on video there posted. So I hate to do the video, but at least we didn't miss a week. Everything kept going. I want to shout out to some of the guys here still don't have power at home. Yeah, they powered through and they're here. Yeah, I'm not sure how pungent they are without showers or whatever, but hey, we are proud of them. That's BetterMan right there. That's motoring through with it. And just give you a context of where we are. This is week 8, and then we've got 9, 10, and 11. So 3 weeks from today will be the last week. That's the week leading into Easter, and then Easter break, and then we take a break. That doesn't mean you as a group have to take a break. A lot of our groups kind of get in a rhythm after this, and they set up, once a month, every other week, going to breakfast, being a group together. So if that's something you want to do, you can start talking about it now, because if you're like me, you find that the camaraderie, the conversation, the opportunity to be together, it just means a lot. So take advantage of the traction that's been built and make sure that you work through that. In fact, just to give you a reminder, we've been talking about these 4 life-giving responsibilities. The man follows God's word. That was last week. This week, he loves and protects God's woman. He excels in God's work, betters God's world. That's the next couple of weeks. Steve will be back next week. And so excited about that. He's excited. So look at work and world. Today we are talking about he loves and protects God's woman. And we're applying a lot of it in the context of marriage. So some of you here, you're like, I'm good. I'm not married. Or, some young men here, you go, that's just so far in the future. I don't even have to think about it. Everybody has women in their life, whether you're married to them or not. Some of these principles apply. Some of them won't. If you're a young man, take better notes. Seriously, take better notes, just because there's more that you will start putting in place now, and you can spare yourself so much trouble. If you're divorced, take good notes. Some of you are divorced and say, I'll never marry again. You don't know. And you may have some baggage in it. Sometimes when we teach through this, a guy that's been divorced, some of the wounds that come out in this, it's hard to listen to or apply. This is a great season in life for you to just kind of look at it and go, okay, how could I do it differently? How could I approach it differently in life? And let me say to every guy here, because I'm teaching the guys, I'm going to call you to what we can do and what we're called to do. Marriage is a two-way street. Some of you are in really tough marriages, and she's the cause. Sometimes we don't say that in church. Church is almost like, the women are always kind of put up on a pedestal, and if the guys would ever just get their act together, then that marriage would be great. That's not always true. We're all fallen human beings, and she brings her stuff into it too. And so some of you are working as hard as you can, and you feel like you're carrying more than you're part of it, and you may be. I can't change that. And the reality is you probably can't change it. So here's all you can do is do what you're called to do. And so today we're going to look at what are you called to do? How do you apply that? But hear me, because I don't want to sell a false bill of goods. Sometimes we can sell it in a way, if you just do what you're supposed to do, everything's going to work out. It doesn't always work when you're in a relationship and you've got another fallen person that's the other side of the equation. Now, I have seen in a relationship where both sides are trying to work on it, especially in a Christian marriage, man, when a guy really steps forward with these principles, you do see some traction. So I don't say that as without hope. I would say, man, put your shoulder into it. But I just like to say at the beginning, you can only control your half of the equation. You can't control all of it. And so you don't need to carry her side of it as well. Now, as we look at that, let's look at winning with your wife. We've got the husband scale. And on one side of the scale, we got the lost husband. The lost husband. What do we mean in that? The lost husband thinks he knows women and guesses about how to live with his wife. He thinks he knows and he guesses. That verse in Proverbs in your notes. There's a way which seems right to a man, but the end of it is the way of death. There's a way, and this verse applies to all of life, where we just kind of think the way that seems right to me, I'm always going by my gut, that's the way that seems right. And as a man, it can almost be like jarring. Scientifically, when you fall in love as a couple, and there's about an 18-month window where your brain is so flooded with different hormones, different chemicals, that love really is blind. For about an 18-month window, yeah, and sometimes I'll counsel couples, they're premarital, and they're in that young run of it, and they have that kind of dewy-eyed, they look at each other, and she just thinks everything he does is wonderful. It's just so cute, the way he's sloppy sometimes. And everything, and you're sitting there going, okay, yeah, let me go ahead and mark the calendar when that's going to run out. Now, as a guy, he's sitting there thinking, man, she loves me, and it's always going to be this way. It's been said, when a man and woman get married, the man's looking over going, she'll never change. It's always going to be like this. The woman's looking at him going, I can change him starting tomorrow. There's that part of the equation out of it. And so if you come at it and just go, man, I'm just going to go off of my gut, I'll just guess, you find yourself always behind the curve. I've told the guys here before, but a few years ago, this is about 10, 15 years ago, I was in a men's fraternity group, and it was Valentine's Day. And everybody around the table is kind of going, what are you doing for your wife? What are you doing? What'd you get? And this one young guy, he had newlywed, and he's kind of got this smug look. He's all looking at us. And I said, hey, what are you doing? He goes, well, we approach these things a little differently. I said, really? And he goes, yeah, we're a very practical couple, so we sat down and we talked about it. Just feel like Valentine's is too much of a waste, so we're not doing anything. And I looked at him and I said, now when you said the words, we're not doing anything, did you think that applied actually to you? Because it doesn't. And he said, no. And it was very condescending at the time. He said, we're just a little different than other couples. And I was like, dude, just listen to me. Do something. Just do something. The next week, I said, hey, how'd Valentine's Day go? His first words, he goes, man, women are so strange. I said, really? Really? Talk to me about it. He goes, well, we're sitting there and we're having dinner and everything's going fine. And she just starts crying. And then she goes to the bedroom, locks the door. And finally I get her to open the door. And she looks at me. She said, you really didn't do anything? Not a card, not anything? And he said, but we agreed we weren't doing anything. She said, I thought that was your way of surprising me. We were all kind of looking at him in diehard mode. Welcome to the party, pal. You're in now. And he goes, man, I just don't know. And every one of us who'd been married for a little bit of time said, man, that's a great posture to actually take. And I would encourage you, for all of us, the life-giving husband, other end of the scale there, the life-giving husband knows he doesn't know. That awareness motivates him to seek out wisdom, practical to help. You know you don't know. And here's what I've learned in this, because you can kind of hit a point where you go, okay, I'm learning marriage, newlywed, you get through that stage. The reality is your wife's going to change the rest of your marriage. And so just when you think you're on top of a season, she's become a new person in ways, and she should, by the way. I'm not saying this in a negative way. You think about it. You're newlywed, and then suddenly you have a baby, and life radically changes, and she changes. And then that you get out of diapers, and you got preschool, and then you get kids off at school, and then you go to elementary school, and then you have teenagers in your house, and you're trying to manage that. And it's different with teenage boys, and then teenage girls, and mom and teenage girls are doing that whole dynamic. And you're trying to figure out how to balance that. And then they start launching, going off to college. You look up as an empty nester, and she's a different person as an empty nester than she was as a mom. And then you go into grandparent phase and all that's involved with it. My point is, she's going to keep evolving and changing as she should. And so even if you've been married for years and you think, man, I got this thing down, there's this part where we always have to stay in this posture of, how am I learning how to be a better husband in this stage, in this season? Look at that verse of Peter. Peter puts it in 1 Peter 3:7. He says, husbands, live with your wife according to knowledge, since she is a woman. That word there is literally in an understanding way. Why? Because she's a woman and you're not. And so as a husband, I've got to come into it with this posture of, how do I understand? How do I learn about her and from her and the differences because she is a woman? By the way, Peter was married. He's one of the few apostles we know was married. So when he writes on marriage stuff, it's like, okay, he's in the game. We know that part of it. And part of it is, she is just different than we are, regardless of what the world is saying. Regardless of the current ideology, men and women are different. Just unequivocally, they're different. There's literally millions of differences biologically. So much so that if you are carted into an emergency room, regardless of what you've declared or done, they want to know what your biological sex is, because it changes how they'll treat you. Because your body's different. Now, that's a whole ideology. Just we need to recognize the difference between us. The physical difference. Men have about 20% more stamina and strength just naturally, right out of the gate. 20% more red blood cells that we produce. And so that gives you stamina and strength. That's why when you see in sports the competing of it, why they need to be separated out of it. Our brains are wired differently. Between the two hemispheres of the brain, the women have a lot more connections. And so they're able to move between the two hemispheres. That's why women are a lot better at multitasking. That they can move between them quickly. Men are better at going deep in one hemisphere or the other. Deep work, deep thought, and that laser focus in that. That's why, just shows up even when you think about it. She's always aware of all the things all the time. We can get focused on the game. March Madness is on and the house is on fire, but I'm about to get my bracket. We're excited about that because we go deep. Shows up in the bedroom. You look at it because she's carrying all that, moving between all the spheres with it. If you're a husband, you ever had that where you're getting down to business and you're focused. Remember, we're laser focused. And she's ping pong, and right in the middle, you be kissing her, whatever. And she goes, oh, yeah, by the way, Tommy is failing math. You're like, at this moment, I don't care if the kid flunks out of school. Let's get in the game here. It's that wiring. It's the wiring between action focus and relational focus. You ever had this if you have kids play sports? Man, dad's natural focus when you're watching a kid out on the field is, how is he doing? Did he do what he needs to do? Mom, more naturally, of course she cares about that, but she's like, how's he feeling? And, oh, did that hurt? And, oh, man, I bet he is so disappointed he missed that shot. And dad's like, his form was terrible. It's just different wiring in all this. Because of that, and we could spend the whole morning going through all the differences that, by the way, are proven scientifically if we look at the science. As you go through these things, it forces us to go, how am I learning and how am I relating in this? So somewhere on this husband scale is you. Just take a moment on your notes or looking on it. Where would you put yourself? And if you're not married, maybe just go, how do I do as far as relating to women? Am I pretty life-giving or am I pretty lost? As we look at it, so what does a wife in particular, and this is where it does, we're talking husbands and wife, what does a wife need from you? First, she needs to feel your heart. She needs to feel your heart. Now, this is hard because this doesn't come naturally to us as guys. As guys, feeling, remember I just told you, we're more action-oriented, we're more laser-focused. This is part of her realm where she's just stronger in naturally. And so because this doesn't come naturally, we can sometimes be obtuse to it, just unaware. I'll see this in counseling. I don't do as much now, but over the years, sometimes you have a couple come in, and they're struggling in their marriage, and he comes in, and he sits down, and you go, so what's going on? And he's like, I think things are fine. I think we're doing great. And then she starts crying. And it's not like any huge thing, but this is the phrase you hear. I don't know him. I don't know what's going on in his world. I don't know how he feels about anything. He feels bottled inside. One woman described it as, I'm like in this boat and he's this island. And I keep looking for a place to land that we're going to connect. And I go around the island and all I get is rocks. I never get beach. I never get that connection point out of it. Ephesians 5, husbands, love your wife as Christ also loved the church. So Christ sacrificed for the church. So even though this doesn't come naturally to us, because we can look at it and go, well, that's just how I'm wired. I'm sorry. That's how it is. I'm not an emotional person. I'm not a talkative person. She knew that when we got married. She's going to have to deal with that. Yeah, that's not what Ephesians says. That's not how Christ approached us. Jesus didn't look and just kind of go, well, this is how I deal with humanity. Sorry. You're just going to have to get over it. He's like, no, okay, how do I sacrifice for her? And he calls us to approach the same way. So priority number one for every husband is to make sure his wife feels loved. His wife feels loved. And notice the words there is not that she is loved, but she feels loved. Almost every husband, unless you're in a hard place, would go, oh, I love my wife. Of course I love my wife. The difference, though, does she know that at a level where she's actually feeling it at the time? In fact, look at that in your notes. Social research has confirmed the single most important, confirmed that emotional engagement with her is far and away the single most important factor in a woman's happiness in marriage. If she feels connected and emotionally engaged. And so this clicker is not wanting to do today. This is a call to emotionally connect with her. You got to step out. And again, it doesn't come naturally. It doesn't come naturally to me. I remember many years ago, I was preaching one morning, and I forget what I was sharing on, but I opened up and just shared some struggles I was going through. And felt vulnerable. You tell a big crowd with it, and afterwards, you have all these people, they're coming down, oh man, thank you for being so transparent. Thank you for being so honest and all this stuff. And you're like, oh man, that's great. And then I get in the car and we're headed home. And I kind of toss out to her, hey, so how do you think it went today? Which is kind of code for, wasn't I awesome? And she's staring out the window. And she goes, it was fine. Yeah, I know. Some of you have been around enough, you go, fine is never a good word. So then I kind of looked over and I said, so, you okay? And again, she goes, I'm fine. And it was said just like that. And finally I said, did I do something? And then she said, well, it's a little hard to hear you share stuff in front of a couple of thousand people that you've not told me. You're open with them, but didn't feel like you needed to tell me that. And I'm hearing it for the first time with everyone else. Yeah, you're all like, oh. Now, unfortunately, I would love to say I handled it so maturely in the moment. I immediately get defensive. I'm like, fine. Here I am opening my life, serving Jesus. This is what I get. And when I got home and cooled off a little bit, I was like, oh, she's so right. All I could do is apologize. Just go, I'm sorry. And I said, I don't know what it is. In some ways, it's easier on a stage. It's harder. When we're vulnerable here, when I got to admit to you, I don't have it together and I hadn't figured it out. That's hard. And I don't do it well. And there's a part as men we can kind of feel like, okay, I'm struggling with something, and my job is to lead us through it. So I got to go figure it out, and then I'll talk to her about it. As opposed to, how do I invite her in the journey? Because that's what her heart longs for. If you don't watch it, Sheldon Van Auken has a great quote. He just says, the killer of love is creeping separateness. Love is a gift of the gods, but then it's up to the lovers to cherish it or to ruin it. Taking love for granted, especially after marriage, ceasing to do things together, finding separate interest. We turn into ourselves, and that's actual selfness, which is selfishness. This is the way, and this is the line that stood out to me, of creeping separateness. In the modern world, everything favors it. The man going to the office, a woman staying at home with her children, or perhaps having a different job. The failures of love might seem to be caused by hate, boredom, or unfaithfulness with a lover, but those are only the results. First came the creeping separateness, the failure behind the failure. So what are some practical ways we can increase this? How do we get better? The first one is regularly reassure your wife. Look in your notes, just some of the ways to do that. Words of affection. You can never say I love you enough. You really can't. And it was startling to me. Shanti Feldhahn did research with women all over the country and just the differences of how men think and how women think. And one of the ones that was the most just startling different, men, especially in a marriage, in a Christian marriage in a home, kind of have an assumption, apart from something drastically being wrong, of course she still loves me. There's just an assumption that we have of, yeah, she loves me. I mean, she's committed to me. Women, even in good marriages, wake up thinking, oh, here's 10 reasons he should stop loving me. I don't look like I used to. I'm not what I was. And she can tell herself that all the time. And one of the things that came out, that's why it's so important that we're constantly reassuring, I love you. I love you in this season of marriage. I don't love you just because you were the woman that stood at the altar. I love how we've evolved together. I loved where we are at this time. Words of praise. You're the best. You're beautiful. You're my best friend. Here's what I would just challenge you. Are you in a kind of phrase rut? In other words, do you kind of have your go-to phrase that you say to her? Hey, love you, baby. Or love you, honey. Kind of whatever your one line is, which may be a great line, by the way, but it's the only one you use. She hadn't heard anything new lately. Bring a little energy and creativity to that. Warm hugs and tender touches that don't always lead to sex. That are not the cue of, hey, I'm giving you this hug so you know what I'm thinking about. In fact, one of the best things you could do, because it disrupts in a good way, actually. And you want to do that, is disrupt. She's thinking, okay, I know what he wants. And you just show her affection with no demand for sex or any part of it. I always look at it, my boys, when we watch a basketball game or something, especially, they'll show me clips. When you get somebody like Steph Curry, they just have great handles with the basketball. And then you go, oh, man, look, he broke his ankles. You watch, he comes in and just jukes for a moment, and the guy's left on the floor with it because he didn't see it coming. And this is what you need to do in your marriage. There's a good juke. When you throw in a phrase that she wasn't expecting, wait, man, that was different. When you know she's exhausted one night, just exhausted, and you still give her a big hug and kiss, and she's thinking, oh, I know what this is going to lead to. And then you roll over. Good night, hon. She's like, whoa, he's affectionate without a demand. And what it does, it disrupts in a way that she's like, oh, he really loves me. It's counterintuitive. The interesting thing, if you'll show affection more like that in those ways, it actually leads to a better sex life. Because it builds on it of what she's longing for out of that. As you look at it, you need to pursue your wife. So look at the things there. Leave a note. Give her a gift on a non-special occasion. Just call her. Just call her. Call her during the day. Hey, just checking in on you. Love you. Ask her, hey, what could I be doing better? How can I love you better? Write a personal note, especially on birthdays, anniversaries, those key times. Don't let Hallmark do all your writing for you. Seriously, don't get a card and, well, he said it perfectly. I could never say. And, hey, I did underline a few places. See, I really, She needs to hear from you personally out of that. Another category around that is speak your wife's love language. If you've never read Gary Chapman's book, it's pretty straightforward. You can see in your notes. He kind of has divided it that there's 5 love languages most of us have. Either words or touch, quality time, gifts, acts of service. There may be more out. I think it's a great book for categories. I wouldn't say I'd put it down as science. And I know some guys that they go, yeah, my wife has all these love languages. She might. Or none of these or whatever. Here's the theme of the book, though. Instead of you just expressing love the way you like to express it and receive it, you look at her and go, how does she most feel loved? Man, if we get some time together, I always know her tank's full. If I take some time and she just hears from me, it's just amazing what a few words does. Man, if I give her a back rub, she knows. It's thinking about those things because we have a propensity to look at it, how do I like to receive it, instead of how I like to give it. Second thing, she needs to see your faith. First is she needs your heart. Second, she needs to see your faith. And again, Ephesians, husbands, keep your wives holy, blameless through washing and water of the word. We have a responsibility. Her spiritual growth is part of your responsibility. And so the key on this one is initiate. Initiate. The biggest breakdown that Adam did, if you go back in that passage, and you can see it in your notes there, in Genesis 3, when the woman saw that the tree was good, it was a delight to the eyes, it was desirable to make one wise, she took the fruit and ate. She gave to her husband with her, and he ate. The whole passage, he's passive. He never steps in. Even though he was commissioned to lead. God had given Adam the command, not Eve. God had told him, you have a responsibility in this. And he just went silent. And he went quiet in this. He should have stepped up. And so one of the key things when we talk about she needs to see your faith is, look in your notes, you can see, you need to initiate those spiritual times of togetherness with her. You need to initiate. And the key word I just put in your notes, circle initiate. Here's what it comes down to. It's initiation more than anything else. Anytime I talk about spiritual leadership or stepping up in this, especially as guys, again, it's almost like the whole area of feelings. She's so much better at that we pull back and we just kind of let her have it. And we end up not meeting her where she needs it. The same way spiritually, I talk to a lot of guys and they go, man, she's ahead of me. She's in more Bible studies. She's in more involvement. She's doing all the stuff in that. And we can almost go, she's got that area. She's good. You're not competing with her. It doesn't mean you have to sign up for more Bible studies than she's in and involvement. She may like to read more than you do. So I'm not trying to turn you into her with that. But there is this core part. How do I, as a man, step forward and initiate in some ways and step out instead of her feeling like she has to carry the full weight of the spiritual tenor of the household? When she feels like that rests on her shoulders. Look at some of the ways to do that. Pray with her. Pray with her. When I talk about spiritual passivity, I think this is the one area we are most passive as men. When just in talking to conversations, knowing it in my own life, it is so easy to just go passive on our prayer lives together. And part of it can be maybe intimidating because you look at it and you go, frankly, she's better at praying than I am. Or frankly, we don't have much background. I don't know how to do that. And we feel real awkward. And as guys, we never like leading in something we feel awkward in. It's just a given in life. You won't put yourself in that context. Here's what I would encourage you. Let me just give you the simplest way if you want to start praying with her. Write down a list of the people in your life you both love. Each other, your kids, if you got grandkids, maybe a friend, and somebody who's going through something. And just have that list. And if you just went to her and said, hey, I would like us once a day, maybe right before we go to sleep or in the morning or sometime, just to pray through this so that we can pray for the people we love. And here's all you got to do is go down it name by name and think of one thing you want God to do in their life. You pray for a kid. Yeah, help them right now because they're doing that. It doesn't. You don't have to have these glowing theological prayers. I promise you this. When she hears you praying for the people that you love, it moves her heart toward you. I don't know how to describe it, but something happens in that moment, especially in a woman's heart, because you're doing two things in that moment. One, she feels this spiritual initiation. He's leading us in this. He cares about it. Then two, she feels that emotional connection because you're praying for people she loves too. It's a 2-for-1. And if you did nothing else out of this session and went home and did that and just said, hey, could we just create a prayer list and I'd like us daily, and it may just be a few minutes, but the regularity of you initiating that, the dividends of it both spiritually but also relationally really will go far in it. Engage her in conversations. Spiritual conversations, all that means is, what is God doing in my life? And you may not even know. You may just go, I'm trying to figure out what God's doing in my life. Encourage church together. You look at the wives who attend church with their husbands on a weekly basis are happier in their marriages. This is over and over again, the stats come with it. Now here's the key. Is she the one that's always initiating? We need to go, we need to get involved, we need to serve? Or do you step forward in that? All of this is how do I relieve her of some of that weight she's carrying? Look at the uphold biblical values. Just that you talk together. What do we believe about this? How are we training our kids? And these are great categories on keeping your word, conflict, time with family, giving, avoiding debt. And you be the standard bearer in the house. This gets hard. I mean, I've got 4 boys between the ages of 16 and 21. And if you just know guys are always pushing the envelope. They just are. And so the balance with Lee at times, sometimes they'll push the envelope and they'll be saying something. And she's like, what does that mean? She finds out what that means. And she's like, what? And so I have to balance of, okay, they're guys, to also the balance of, hey, we don't talk like that in this house. Or we're not going to, and it's, but see, if I'll step into it, it keeps her from feeling like, man, I got to be the nag all the time that jumps on that stuff. But the flip side of it, she can also trust those times when I go, hey, babe, give them a little space here. Let's not get too wigged out about this. It's just part of it. But it's stepping into that instead of making her negotiate that. Other thing is building friendships with godly men. Having these kind of relationships. When you're with other guys and iron is actually sharpening iron, you're better for your wife, and she knows it. She feels it. And so that's why, as much as you can, continue to foster what you're experiencing around the table. Last category with it. She needs the freedom to choose. We're talking about specifically financially. Husbands, provide and care for your wives. The call here is to financially liberate your wife. Financially liberate your wife. And you can look at that. We're in the 21st century. Women have amazing opportunities. And hear me, I don't want to go backwards. I don't want to go back to some, 1950s and every woman's supposed to be home in a kitchen and all that. I'm thrilled. I got daughters. I got grown daughters. I'm thrilled for the opportunities they have in life and want them to have it. You have daughters too. And we see that. What we want to do, though, and look at that survey. According to the general survey, every year since 1972, women's reported happiness has declined. And it all goes down to work-life balance. Because they're really pushed. They're supposed to be super women in everything. They're supposed to be super women at work and super women at home. And they feel it all the time. And they carry both of it all the time. And so every year, as the freedom of opportunity has gone up, which is a good thing, you're seeing a happiness scale go down because of that balance. As you look at that, golly, this thing. Husbands are the difference makers when it comes to a wife's work-life balance. You're the difference maker. And so you look at it of how do you step back and go, how am I freeing her as much as I can? Now, hear me. We live in the Bay Area. It's hard here. I mean, even as I've seen some of this material taught in other parts of the country, there's a lot of flexibility. I've got kids who live in the other parts of the country so that they can maintain more balance of it. So I get it here. Here would be my challenge, especially to you younger guys here. It's interesting. Guys my generation and above, we naturally kind of came to it with a sense of, man, we want to work as much as possible to free her up. I talk to the next generation, it's just the assumption, we're both working full-time all the time, no matter what. That's just the assumption out of it. Again, I don't know your home and how you're going to make it work, but I would challenge you, if you're not talking about it and having the conversation, and she's not feeling as a wife that you're coming at it going, I want to provide every opportunity for you, especially when the kids are really young. She feels it the most then. And again, I don't want to beat anybody up because there's probably somebody here, you two are barely making it together and you're trying to figure it out. Here's the key is, are we talking about it? How are we having conversations? Are we willing to look at even how we're doing life in order to make this work? Because she feels that weight all the time and she feels pulled in both. I remember when I was going to seminary, it was a 4-year program, it was expensive. We were there. I was working one job and going to school full-time. She was working full-time. She was a teacher. We didn't have kids. And she had worked all the way up until that time, and our benefits were with her, everything with it. And then, after 9 years of infertility, we got pregnant right in the middle of seminary. And we'd always talk, man, she was like, oh, man, I want to be home with the kids. But suddenly you're like, ooh, I don't know how we're going to do this. And so we prayed about it and talked about it. And then she came and she says, I really feel like once we have a baby, I need to be home. So I was like, all right, let's figure this out. So we got another job. So I was working a job and a half over full-time and going to school full-time. And I knew all these other people, especially in seminary, all these people like, we made that choice and then God sent money in the mail. The check came. Our check never came. I mean, it literally about killed me the next few years. And I don't know how we got through. We got through, though, with it. But I promise you this, I don't regret that. I don't regret the investment out of it. Now, we hit another season a few years ago, and the schooling situation wasn't working, and we needed to get our kids in private school. And a job opened up for Lee to work at the school. And so again, we sit down and go, okay, what is impacting that? And determined it was better for her to work during that time. So again, every family, every situation is different. I get that. The key is, are you thinking about it enough, and are you talking to her about it, of where she is? I had a friend, Kevin, he was an attorney, and he had stepped back in his practice. He had reached that point, stepped back quite a bit, was engaged with the kids some, was doing some things. His wife was a doctor, emergency room doctor. And we were going through this material, and part of the key question we were talking about is, have you talked to her about it? Have you even asked her, does she still want to work in this season? And so he went to her and he said, hey, thinking he obviously knew the answer. He said, hey, we were talking about this. Just wondering, do you still want to work? And she looked at him, she said, let me think about it. And he panicked. He was like, ugh. And for 2-3 days. And then she came back to him. She said, I do want to work. I'm a great doctor. I love being a doctor. And that's true for some of your wives. She loves work because she's great at it. Part of that freedom is helping her discover those parts as well. But she said this to Kevin. She goes, you will never know what it means to me that you were at least willing to ask the question. and that you were the one that brought it to the table. Because I know you got my back. And she said, it's weird. Even though I'm going to keep working full time, it just, part of a weight was off that I didn't feel like I have to do this because you're thinking about us and you're leading in it. Guys, every wife wants to feel like her husband is stepping into that, is thinking about it, is working together. Even if you're in a place that you go, hey, right now, we've got to both work to make this work. You're at least the one initiating instead of assuming. And you would talk to her about that so that you can help find it. And if she's working, and let me just say this to a younger generation. It's funny. The stats have come out. You got a younger generation that's like, oh, we want women liberated that much more. They are worse at actually sharing the workload at home. Some of the guys that hold the ideal the most, they're like, oh, I'm all for that. Don't do anything at home. So if you're going to call her to that, guess what? As guys, we get to carry the workload at home too, that we're helping with that balance. It's not just the assumption she's a paycheck and she's also the one that makes this place run perfectly. It takes both of us in the equation. As you look at this, look at the final parts of it, this summary. Emotional connector, she feels loved, she feels protected, and she feels free. Now, here's what I would challenge you on this one, because there was a lot of practical advice all the way through this session. You ought to do well, go through it and create a checklist and actually do something. Don't just learn something, actually do it. If you do nothing more, then pick 3 or 4 things and go, oh, I could do that today. I could do that this week. We could start doing that. Hear me. When you do that, and it's funny, anytime I'm teaching BetterMan or men's fraternity in that, I always get about this time period, especially when you start training guys to just put some of this stuff in action, your wives start grabbing me in the hallway. They just do. They're like, man, I don't know what you're teaching, but keep it up. It's so much better in our household. I didn't know he would do that, or he just seems so much more aware. And I always tell him, I go, it really is not the teaching. It's just a husband decided to get it in gear. So don't thank me. Go home and thank him. Go home and high five him because he's doing instead of just learning. And one of my pet peeves, and I see it in my own life, but especially in church, man, we can become professional learners on these things. And when really this lesson's filled with a practical checklist that if we just start checking them off and doing them, she will feel the difference today. And you'll feel the difference in your home because of it. Hey, why don't we dive in? Let's get some time talking about how we can do this together.